What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And the phone lines are closed right now while I catch up on the news. We may open them again a little bit later. So what we're seeing right now is the Russian collusion theory, meme, hoax, fantasy has pretty much collapsed. And now they're shifting gears to try and rebrand as, well, we're really concerned about Donald Trump's obstruction of justice. And apparently Robert Mueller is now expanding his special counsel investigation to include obstruction of justice. And as you know, there was that very strange report that came on out where Mueller has offered James Comey an immunity deal, which didn't make sense in the context of Russian collusion investigation, but does in the context of obstruction of justice. There's only one problem with that. Special counsels are set up to investigate a specific issue. They're not allowed to go on fishing expeditions. And we know that, first of all, there's a conflict of interest because Mueller and Comey go back a long time together. When Mueller was head of the FBI, Comey was his deputy. And working together, they worked to frame people like Stephen Hatfield for the anthrax letters after 9/11, for which the government was sued for almost $5 million. So they're dirty. They're both of them very, very dirty. And Mueller has loaded up his staff at the special counsel office with all of these known Clinton and Obama supporters and donors. And it's very obviously not being set up to be an impartial, objective investigation. It's a hatchet job. It is a witch hunt. Sean Hannity is out there saying Mueller has to go, and he does. Congress should shut down the special counsel because it was brought about through Comey's leaking of this memo to the New York Times, which forced Jeff Sessions to recuse himself. And it was all based on that now completely discredited dossier of Donald Trump and the prostitutes in Russia, blah, 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 blah. It is a fantasy. It's concocted out of thin air. And I understand and I agree that Donald Trump should not fire the special counsel because the liberal Democrats are going to scream, oh, it's Archibald Cox all over again, it's Richard Nixon. But Congress really ought to shut this down before it turns into another huge embarrassment. Now, Ken Starr, who was good friends, well, not good friends, but he was basically involved in the Clinton scandals all those years ago, he's out there saying that in his eyes, he doesn't see a case for an obstruction charge. This is just more trying to keep Donald Trump so busy dealing with the alligators in that swamp that he is unable to implement his agenda that he promised us during the campaign. So that in 2020, the Democrats can say, well, see, Trump didn't keep any of his promises. Yeah, because the Democrats are just constantly throwing these spitballs at him. And it's making us look weak to the rest of the world. Yes, we're very strong militarily. At least we are told that we are. But other nations are looking at what's going on and seeing the United States as weak politically because it does lack unity. Now, getting over to the war zones, apparently ISIS has collapsed east of Palmyra, and the Syrian army is now advancing toward Deir ez-Zor, and they're making tremendous, tremendous gains. Now, Secretary of Def Mattis is still out there trying to defend all these attacks on the Syrian forces, saying it was self-defense. Those Syrian forces got too close to us. We were afraid we were going to be harmed. And let us not forget, those U.S. forces inside Syria do not have the permission of the Syrian government to be there in the first place. So you can see how ridiculous this is. The U.S. government has effectively invaded Syria, and when the Syrian forces come close, the U.S. government bombs them and says, oh, we're only protecting ourselves. That's like Adolf Hitler invading France and claiming that he's attacking the Allied armies only as self-defense. Now, apparently, the push through to the Iraqi border by the Syrian forces apparently caught some of our military planners by surprise. And Defense Secretary Mattis is saying, yeah, they didn't see it coming. And it was a very bold move because they have literally boxed in the U.S. forces in southern Syria. And the original goal of those forces in that area, they wanted to use Al-Tanf as a staging point for a push into the Euphrates Valley. And now basically the U.S. forces, they're an isolated outpost in the desert. They're ineffective where they are right now. Meanwhile, a Syrian delegation has traveled to Baghdad to discuss joint efforts to secure the border between Syria and Iraq, both in the context of the attempt to carve a new Kurdistan out of it, but more to the point of not letting the U.S. forces cross back and forth willy-nilly. And, of course, applying the same thing to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining our network. Now, Secretary of Defense Mattis was grilled before the Senate yesterday. We didn't see it televised because everybody was paying attention to the shooting. But basically was called on the carpet by McCain saying there doesn't seem to be a strategy to win in Afghanistan. And Mattis is promising a new, improved approach by July. But after 15 years in Afghanistan, there is no end in sight. The U.S. forces and the puppet regime are controlling the western part of Afghanistan where the opium poppies and the oil pipeline right-of-way is. But they can't gain ground in the mountainous eastern portion. So, Tillerson is now out there advocating flexibility on the Ukraine crisis. He says he doesn't want to be handcuffed to the Minsk agreements, and that maybe it's time to look outside the framework of the Minsk agreements, which is a very long, roundabout, convoluted way of saying that the U.S. government is going to ignore another agreement, which these days doesn't surprise anybody. Now, the Senate, as you know, yesterday voted overwhelmingly to impose tough sanctions against Russia for meddling in the U.S. election, invading Crimea, and backing Syrian strongman Bashar al-Assad, ignoring these little minor details like the absence of any evidence Russia meddled in the U.S. election. Remember, all of the election fraud that's been documented favored Hillary Clinton. Russia never invaded Crimea. It simply did not happen. They used to just say that Russia stole Crimea. Now they're actually out there. Chuck Schumer's actually out there saying Russia invaded Crimea. It simply did not happen. And Russia is not so much supporting Assad as trying to get ISIS out of Syria, just as the U.S. government claims it's there trying to do. I'm beginning to get a sense that Washington, D.C. has become so frustrated at the American people seeing through the lies, they're starting to go into denial. They don't want to know anymore. They've stopped the internal polling. They're just going to go on out there and repeat the lies over and over and over again and hope you'll get tired and say, all right, Russia's the bad guy. Take my money, take my children, go kill Russia. Now, Germany and Austria have come out strongly opposed to the new U.S. sanctions against Russia because Germany and Austria are two of Russia's biggest energy clients in Europe. And they're warning that these sanctions could affect European businesses involved in piping the Russian natural gas and can harm relations between Germany and the United States and between Austria and the United States. In other words, the sanctions are pushing these countries away from the United States, which doesn't have anything Germany and Austria really want, and closer to Russia, which has the energy resources they need. So again, we're seeing a ham-fisted move by the Senate that was not thought all the way through to its possible side effects. Now, Donald Trump, in some of his interviews, is out there saying he agrees with Trump that the Russia hacking the election mantra is fake news. Yes, it's fake news. Of course it's fake news. There's nothing coming out of the corporate media that is believable except the sports scores and the weather report, and they're not even all that good on the weather report. Now, getting on down to Qatar and talking about what's really going on there. Is it really a backdoor to the long-desired war on Iran? Possibly. You need to understand that Qatar and Iran share the world's largest natural gas field. One of Qatar's major exports is liquefied natural gas. And basically, when you go back to May 21st, when Donald Trump was speaking to the Gulf leaders in Saudi Arabia, he was talking about the threat to the petrodollar from China and the yuan. And the more and more they push on these countries, the more these countries that have the oil and gas are turning away from the West and the dollar, and they're realigning with the East, with Russia, the ruble, and the yuan. And that's what they're trying to stop. That's what all of this blood and carnage is all about. It's an argument over which brand of ink and paper the world is supposed to use for the next 100 years. It's a stupid reason for a world war. But that's how they're thinking. Meanwhile, Iran has succeeded in sending 500 tons of food supplies into Qatar. And again, what has really put the wrinkle on all of this, notice that Saudi Arabia has not invaded Qatar yet, even though Qatar has told Saudi Arabia to take their list of 10 demands and stick it where the sun don't shine. Because all of a sudden you've got Turkey aligning with Qatar, Iran is on Qatar's side, Russia's coming on in. We're always talking about the potential for this spiraling out of control, but right now, I would suspect that serious career military experts within the government are looking at the situation and saying, in point of fact, the United States is not able to take on a military peer at this time. And that means running the risk of a nuclear exchange. And by the way, people are still scratching their heads over the fact that Donald Trump sold this $100 billion weapons package to Saudi Arabia, and then immediately after, the U.S. is selling $12 billion worth of F-15s to Qatar after accusing them of supporting terror. Well, because, you know, accusations of terror, that's politics and that media, but $12 billion worth of military-industrial complex, we're not going to turn that one down. And so here we are, the U.S. literally trying to get a war going between Saudi Arabia and Qatar and selling weapons to both sides. It almost reminds me of one of Stephen King's books, Needful Things, where Satan comes into this little town. They don't know he's Satan, of course, and he's selling guns to everybody and then foaming up trouble to get them shooting and killing at each other to harvest their souls. And by the way, read the book. The movie made from it really sucked. Now, do you remember this whole mantra that we have been getting this year? Massive surge in anti-Semitism, and it came on out there has been a 60 blah, 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 blah increase in anti-Semitic incidents. And then it came on out that all of these increased incidents came down to just 2 young hoaxers. And here's the problem. Even though it's all been exposed as a hoax, organizations like the ADL and the corporate media are still out there pushing, there's a massive surge in anti-Semitism. Don't bother us with the truth and the facts. We're too busy selling the agenda. Now, we've been talking about the poor quality of U.S. weapons and the amazing weapons that Russia is developing for much less cost, like the Zircon missile, and now China's apparently developing their own hypersonic missiles to be carried on jet fighters that are going to be able to fly at 4,000 miles an hour to hit their targets. And just like the Navy not having the means to defend against rapidly moving anti-ship missiles, like the Zircon, the U.S. doesn't really have anything that can detect and engage an incoming threat that's traveling at 4,000 miles an hour. The U.S. has invested these trillions of dollars refining the weapons that won World War II, and the rest of the world has gone past them, seriously thinking about what are the weapons that will win World War III. Remember that big debate between the proponents of the battleship and the aircraft carrier going into World War II? And the naval doctrine at the time was the mainstay of naval combat will be these big battleships slugging it out with shells. And yes, an aircraft carrier is kind of nice to have, but it's not going to play a major role in the conflict. And of course, history proved that wrong. And unfortunately, that same institutional inertia seems to be infecting our military thinking right now. The focus is still on the aircraft carriers, even though most military experts are saying they're now very vulnerable because other countries are developing weapons specifically designed to identify, target, and get in on an aircraft carrier past its defensive screening. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the Carl Vinson Strike Group has arrived here in Hawaii. I can look out this window over here down at the Carl Vinson, and that means this morning all of the hookers in Waikiki are walking bow-legged. They are supposedly going to have tours on the Carl Vinson. I'm trying to find out how I could get permission to get on board there. I've been on a lot of different ships. I've never actually been on a real aircraft carrier. That would be cool. I'm opposed to war, but let's be honest, they got cool toys. All right, so let's move on here to the economic news. Very interesting article that came out from a deviant investor called Falling Rocks in the Promised Land. And it's a very creative, artistic title. But what the article is really talking about is we have seen time and time again in the economy over the past several years, there'll be bubbles. So the mortgage bubble, the car loan bubble, this bubble, that bubble. They're saying the danger right now is that we're having everything is bubbling up at the same time. They're calling it the everything bubble. And that when it bursts, that could be the trigger that's going to bring the crash everybody's been warning us about. Apparently, in Europe, their banks are facing a 4.7 billion euro fine collectively after the General Data Protection Regulation comes into force. This is coming from data security solutions firm All Clear ID. Apparently, they are not up to standard. They're not playing by the rules. Somebody didn't want to sign a check here. Wells Fargo has now been accused of making improper changes to mortgages. Bank of America has started laying off employees. They won't say how many are going to be let go. These are all very, very bad indicators. Now, as we head into the Brexit negotiations, the European Union is preparing the legal mechanism to basically take over London's extensive trading business with euro derivatives. I think if the London financial people are smart, they will not oppose this, because the derivatives market globally is a disaster waiting to happen. And I think London might be very well off to just say, sure, we'll send it to Paris and the EU, cut their losses before it comes apart. Meanwhile, Greece is on the brink of bankruptcy. The Eurogroup president is saying they refuse to agree to debt relief. There's not going to be a bailout anytime soon. Greece is refusing to go along with all the demands placed on it, including more austerity on the people and the privatization of Greek public assets, which I don't think the government of Greece legally has a right to sell. All those public assets are paid for by the taxpayers. The taxpayers collectively own them, and only the taxpayers collectively can agree to that sale. But we're seeing it all over the world. Here in the United States, taxpayer-funded assets are being sold by the governments into private corporate hands. And I don't think that's legal. I really do not think that's legal. Meanwhile, Nike has announced 1,400 layoffs as discretionary money dries up, meaning people don't have the money to go on out and buy a shoe that's twice as expensive because it has a swoosh on it. That kind of gratuitous decoration doesn't last in a stressed economy. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're just getting a detail. Remember when the shooting happened yesterday morning and the media was already out there saying, oh, he had an AR-15, an AR-15. Well, it turns out, once again, the media did not have the story correctly. The shooter was using an SKS. which is a gun that precedes the AK-47 by about 4 years. He also had a 9mm handgun. So there was no AR-15. Once again, the media is out there demonizing the most popular rifle in America, and rather gratuitously. Now, getting on back to the economic news. Yesterday we reported on how Sears Canada is saying they're not going to be able to continue their operations up there, and today we're finding out that Sears Canada has hired a bankruptcy advisory firm, the same one that represented Target Canada in its insolvency proceedings. Another bad sign there. Over at the Huffington Post, they laid off 39 staffers yesterday, and apparently this was because Huffington Post is owned by America Online, which was just acquired by Verizon. So a lot of mergers, acquisitions, and paring down here. If you're a fan of the Cheesecake Factory, you might want to cash in those little gift cards real soon, because apparently their sales have slid, part of the restaurant decline in general. And again, when your economy is starting to go bad, restaurants are often one of the first sectors to really feel the pain, because people don't have the money to go eat out anymore. They go to the grocery store, or they're growing something in the backyard, they stay at home and they cook it. Apparently, the credit rating for the state of Illinois could be set to junk status within the next 2 weeks. And as one of the callers at the first part of the show mentioned, Illinois is going to cease all road work the 1st of next month, July 1st. They're just canceling all of the contracts. So look for Illinois roads to get worse. Gosh darn those Republican... No, wait a minute. The Democrats are in charge of Illinois. That's right. The Democrats are in charge over there. Now, there is a warning being sounded out of concern. As you know, our railroad system is very important. And apparently, the U.S. rail companies are literally importing their boxcars, their rail cars, from China. And part of that is because the Chinese government subsidizes their companies that produce railway rolling stock. Well, if Donald Trump wants to bring jobs back to this country, I think this would be a really good way to do it, to basically impose import tariffs on imported Chinese rail cars and start cranking up the factories in this country that know how to make it. We're not talking a high-tech item here. It's just big iron. And this might also lead to the reopening and revitalization of some of the domestic American steel mills as well. We're going to take a phone call here. Ramsey in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I have a question. I want to say something, then I ask a question. Regarding the shooting, see, sir, I think what happened was all planned up, like for a long time, and that guy, I've heard that he was working with people from the SPLC.
This is kind of a bad phone connection. Can you speak a little bit louder so we can hear you?
Yeah, sorry. Is that better?
Much better.
Okay. You see, I was going to say that regarding the shooting. In my opinion, this was all planned up for like weeks or probably months. And also, I've heard that guy, he was working with people from the SPLC. That's what I've heard. Like that guy just woke up one morning and did this. I don't buy that. Like this was all planned up.
Well, I'm pretty sure he planned it for a long time. First of all, he moved to Alexandria, and before he moved, there had been a noise complaint from his neighbors that he had been target practicing out back of his home, which is legal to do, but it sort of made it look like he was trying to prep for this. Anyway, Ramsey, going to let you go. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I'm looking over at Fox News, where they're confirming that Robert Mueller is shifting the focus of the special counsel office away from the Russian collusion idea, which has collapsed for lack of evidence, and now they're pushing that obstruction of justice charge. Even though Comey said under oath he was never asked or ordered to alter any investigation. This has just reached the point of silliness. All right, getting on back to the economic news, because we're coming up on the top of the hour, and Paul Topetti from Poker Face here. Article that came out of Blacklisted News warning that when the economy starts to really come apart, which at this point seems to be inevitable, that already the liberal Democrats are getting ready to sell the idea that this is all Donald Trump's fault, that the economy was just absolutely beautiful and recovering and everybody was happy and this was a land of plenty right up to the end of last year, and as soon as Trump took over, it just all went to heck in a handcart. And we made that prediction last year. I said Trump needs to be very careful. I mean, I know he wants the job of president, but he's going to be president during a big economic crash, and everybody's going to say it was all his fault. It's all like Herbert Hoover. Everybody claimed Herbert Hoover created the Great Depression of the 1930s, but he didn't. It was created for him by the bankers. More bad news for the cable TV industry. Almost half of all remaining cable subscribers are indicating they're ready to cut that cable. And I can understand why. Nothing but reruns. The only reason we have not terminated our cable contract is it's also our internet source, and obviously we can't get along without that. But we've turned off all the premium channels and everything. There's nothing there. It's the same stuff over and over and over and over again. Now, a little bit of good news for much beleaguered sport fans all across the country. Apparently, Congress is considering a new law that is going to impose strict limits on local governments using taxpayer funds to build professional sports stadiums. And they made an illustration of the fact that when New York City agreed to build a new stadium for the Yankees, they partially paid for the project by issuing more than $1.6 billion in municipal bonds, which means that the Red Sox fans in Boston ended up indirectly paying for their rival's new home. And that hardly seems fair. I mean, when you look at these professional sports teams, they're owned by billionaires. Why can't they build their own sports stadium? Now, apparently a new law has come into effect in Nevada, basically making it a free trade zone for Bitcoin and other blockchains. And apparently Nevada wants to become a hub for blockchain startups and is basically trying to set up this free trade zone to sort of encourage this as a new business to possibly diversify away from the casinos. Because, again, as the economy declines, the gambling casinos aren't doing very well. The Las Vegas shows aren't doing very well. In fact, just like the car dealerships, where you're seeing ads for cars at extremely low prices, you're seeing these ads for the Las Vegas resorts where they're practically giving those rooms away. However, we do need to have a little bit of a caution. Story out of Natural News talking about the recent Bitcoin flash crash, underscoring that Bitcoin is not really a store of value. It's a virtual currency. It has no real backing or foundation to it, similar to the Federal Reserve note. It is wide open to manipulation. And they had that surge of Bitcoin selling in Japan that pushed up the price. Then it dropped. Now you've got Kramer out there saying Bitcoin's going to go to $1 million. And that right there tells you that this is something that is open to shenanigans. Any form of monetary exchange, sooner or later, the wolves of Wall Street will get in there and find a way to mess around with it. Meanwhile, Angela Merkel is trying to deal with some of Europe's out-of-control debt by asking the G20 to impose a global tax on the Internet, where every keystroke so much goes to the G20, who will then spend it on themselves. And, of course, once they start taxation on the Internet, they can use targeted taxation to go after, for example, the independent media. For example, let's say they put a $5,000 tax on running a website. And obviously websites for stores, governments, media corporations could afford that. 1- and 2-person operations like whatreallyhappened.com, there's no way we could do that. If I had $5,000, I'd be buying a newer car right about now. Meanwhile, the U.S. is blocking Chinese investment, or they're thinking about blocking Chinese investment in artificial intelligence companies here in the United States of America. They're concerned that China may acquire the technology and take the lead away from the United States. Not that I think we have the lead over here. But of course, no such restriction applies to Israel. They can come on in and invest in America's top IT companies and then move them to Israel. That's what they did with Intel. So again, one set of rules for Israel and another set for everybody else. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Steve in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, when you mentioned the sports stadiums being built by the taxpayers and the billionaires having it all funded for them, I mean, that's a clear example of corporate fascism right there. And that's been going on for a long time, and I don't know why that continues, that these billionaires who own these teams keep pushing it off and getting away with you and I, building the sports stadiums for them. It's just, this is going on forever.
Yeah, it has been. And obviously, these billionaire owners of these professional sports teams are very good friends with the local politicians. I imagine they're very generous campaign contributors, and that's part of the factor as well. But looking at the actual economics of these stadiums, very rarely do they ever pencil out. I mean, the justification given to the population is, we're going to spend taxpayer money on the stadium, and it's going to bring all kinds of new economic activity to our community. Well, the community is going to be going to the stadium, but unless you have like a World Series or final game, where a lot of people are flying in from other places to come on in, it's really not new economic activity, it's just redirected economic activity. And again, like the Olympics, it never really pencils out. Again, I see no reason why these owners of these professional sports teams, if they want a really gigantic stadium, they should pick up the cost for it.
I totally agree. Hey, going back to Illinois and their economic woes right now, I mean, we just need to look at which they haven't talked about in a while, but just looking at the default of the lottery system they have there, and they're in bad shape if they can't pay out on their lottery, because that lottery is a huge revenue maker for them.
Yeah.
And evidently it's being used to pay off every little bill they can, but if they can't pay out the winnings, they are in ruins right now.
Well, that started back in 2015, where Illinois, if you won more than $600 in the Illinois lottery, you got an IOU from the state, which they'll make good on somewhere down the road, maybe, possibly, blah, blah, blah. And I'm surprised people are still buying Illinois lottery tickets if you can't actually win more than $600.
Right. Well, we need to tack on some interest on that, too.
I would agree. I would agree on that.
Hey, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, finally, after all the Sturm und Drang, the Brexit negotiations will start next Monday, June 19th. There was earlier speculation that there might be a delay because Prime Minister Theresa May, at least for the moment, is still scrambling to put together some kind of a coalition to prop up her minority government. And a new wrinkle that's coming on in, the DUP, which Theresa May has approached to try and form a majority, a slim one, wants Nigel Farage to have a role in the Brexit negotiations. And that is going to complicate things. Now, the European Union, I have to wonder what they're thinking. Apparently, the European Parliament's Brexit negotiator today said that if Britain actually changes its mind and comes back to the European Union, they will lose all benefits. They'll lose the favorable terms of its EU membership, including the budget rebate and opt-outs on Schengen. Basically what it was is Britain's membership in the European Union, they had a few special concessions made to them, and basically Verhofstadt is saying that will all be gone. If you come back to the EU, it'll be as a regular EU member, and that means you will use the euro, and you'll be subject to all of our... So that's really kind of, I think, a very bad opening gambit, because you're basically adding fuel to the fire of the Brexit moving forward. Meanwhile, in other parts of the EU, this issue of the refugees is really beginning to fan on up. And this refugee crisis could actually shatter the EU even more so than all of the accumulated debt by the European Central Bank. Poland is basically standing up and saying, we're ready for a fight. And Poland is telling the EU, we're going to just fight the penalty for refusing to accept any more refugees. Meanwhile, the ex-EU chief Schultz is demanding Hungary lose their subsidies over the migrant clash. More and more people are convinced the reason the European Union wants its own army is because they're seeing a future coming on up where they're going to have to militarily intervene in the member states to slap them down. And of course, from the United States point of view, they see a unified European Union army as a rival to NATO and U.S. influence in the region. So they're actually kind of opposed to that. Now, there's something very bizarre going on up in Sweden. I tell you, Sweden would never, ever go there. When Grand Tour was up there, Jeremy Clarkson couldn't resist making fun of just how over-the-top liberal they have gone. Their feminist government, they've got this huge rape epidemic going on up there. And now apparently that children who are in families facing deportation are going into comas. And the only known cure is for the parents to be granted residency permits. Oh, come on. Are you really trying to sell that? You know, that the fear and trauma of being sent home is putting these children into a coma, and all you have to do is wave a residency permit over their faces and they will immediately regain consciousness. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. All right, we're going to take a phone call from Dude from Modesto, California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I'm a long-time listener. Over the past couple of days, I wanted to share a story with you and your listeners. Over the past couple of days, I've had this problem. I shouldn't say a couple of days. I should say more like past month or two. Ever since the Supreme Court put out that rule about net neutrality or somebody. I forgot what the news was, but I'm just finding out now that I'm being affected. This has to do with Comcast. Yeah, I just found out. I usually use a VPN, and I always use the Open VPN protocol.
Yep.
I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yep.
But you know, it's a very good protocol. I used to I programmed my router on it because I didn't want their apps on my computer, so I programmed my router. And over the past couple, ever since that decision came out, my router, my OpenVPN, stopped working. So I'm working really hard to try to get it to work, and it never did. So unfortunately, I kind of blame my VPN company. I sent them a horrible message because I blame them, unfortunately. And I bought another VPN company. And this one talked to me, and they said, yeah, it appears that Comcast is now blocking the OpenVPN protocol. Okay,
so the problem is Comcast. Now, that doesn't really have anything to do with net neutrality itself, because net neutrality is the idea that the backbone providers are allowed to give higher priority to corporate customers and lower the priority of us serfs out here. But we see a lot of companies are changing protocols to force updates and upgrades. We're going through this big thing right now where Skype has announced that many of their platforms for certain, many of the Skype versions for certain platforms like the Windows Phone and everything will stop working the 1st of next month. And so people are scrambling to deal with that. And part of it is economics. They don't want to have to maintain so many versions. Certainly in the case of Skype, a big part of it is the transition from its original peer-to-peer model, which worked very well, to an entirely cloud-based service. So all of those versions of Skype that were still trying to work as peer-to-peer, they have stopped working, and you have to have everything go through the cloud, which means don't say anything really incriminating or embarrassing on Skype anymore because somebody might be listening.
True, but it seems to me that the reason why they would And the reason why I came to that conclusion is I looked at an article, a Best VPN article, and they said, yeah, ever since, and the article says, ever since that decision that, they are blocking the Open VPN protocol. And, my feeling about that is, the Open VPN protocol is basically to protect your privacy, or that's why I use it. It seems like one of the better protocols for that, and, it just, seems obvious to me that the reason why they would want to do that is because I guess, they want to look at your content. They want to sell your content.
That could very well be. I know that ever since Spectrum took over Oceanic here on Oahu, they have sold my local email address to all kinds of advertisers. I'm just being flooded with all of these emails, ads to my local email address for things I would never have any possible use for, but it's just a blanket blast of the advertising stuff, and I have to go through every one and unsubscribe, and it's just been a real pain. But again, they're all struggling for market share. We know that cable subscriptions are down, and at this point, anything that makes money is going to be seen as good, and to heck with whether it angers, annoys, or inconveniences the end user. And I really do wish that the cable TV industry had been set up to allow for competition instead of these franchise areas being granted where if you live in that area, you only have one choice of a provider. It's basically a licensed monopoly, and monopolies always wind up being abusive to the consumer.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I just wanted to tell your folks about that, at least if they're using the Open VPN protocol, Comcast is blocking it.
All right. Well, thank you for that information. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Earlier in the show, I made a joke about never trust anything from the corporate media except the sports scores and the weather, and they're not very good on the weather. Yesterday at this time, the forecast for today was clear, sunny skies, and we've got thunderstorms coming in. So I think it illustrates my point. Getting on back to the issue of immigration, out in California, La La Land, they're defying the federal mandate to expand the immigration detention centers. California is, I guess the phrase would be, an open rebellion against the nation's immigration laws, and frankly, I think it's time for the governor and all of these politicians who are behind this to be brought up on Title VIII violations, because it is illegal to offer aid and comfort or transportation to people who are not legally supposed to be in this country. Now, everybody is still out there arguing against Donald Trump's border wall, saying it's going to cost $20 billion to build that wall. In 2016, the cost of taking care of all the illegal immigrants in this country was $116 billion. It doesn't matter what the wall is going to cost. It's going to be far less expensive than maintaining this open border situation. Now, here in Hawaii, they're unfortunately cracking down on the homeless population. They actually have put out this law making it a crime to sit in one place for too long or to lie down on the ground, which is silly in a vacation resort where people tend to lie on the beach and lie on the grass and all the rest of it. But apparently, two of the most volatile homeless camps on Oahu were dismantled earlier this week. Where do they think these people are going to go? We're an island. We're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's not like they could walk anyplace else here. Of course, we got this big, gigantic warship out there in the harbor. I'll bet that would hold all of Hawaii's homeless inside. So let's talk about the Grenfell Tower, which is a horrible tragedy and an illustration of politics run amok. And by the way, the building did burn down to the frame, and it is still standing. A little reminder that something very wanky about Building 7. In fact, all three buildings over at 9/11. Attention is now being focused on the cladding on the outside of the building. Apparently, it was a very inexpensive polystyrene-type plastic, which we know is flammable, and it went up like a matchstick. And apparently the city council was advised not to go with this cladding because of the potential for fire. But they went with the cheapest bid. Now, Theresa May is calling for a public inquiry. They're now saying that by the time they're done cleaning out this building, there may be as many as 100 people dead in that building. There was this horrible video that was live streamed from a cell phone by a mother who apparently did not succeed in getting out of the fire. We're going to take a break for station identification. We're going to come back with Paul Topetti and Freedom Palooza after these few words.